peace.
I'm good.
Everything you need to know about the 3 Rings of Power in the season finale. Say hello to Middle-earth, where we finally obtain solutions to the questions that have hung over The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 1. Celebrimbor helps the series live up to its title, and the secrets of the Stranger and Sauron are finally unearthed. The identity of Halbrand as Sauron has finally been exposed.
To my ally, when you tell them that Sauron lives because of you!
The name of the Stranger, who was among the other key contenders, is thus the focus of the season finale's second significant reveal. The Stranger is indeed not Sauron, but rather Gandalf, though he isn't named by that title in this episode or any of his others such as Mithrandir or Olorin. His delivery of the famed Gandalf statement to always follow your nose renders his identity undeniable.
If you die in Enoch, always follow your nose.
In doubt, Eleanor Brandyfoot. Always follow your nose.
While the Nazgul's 9 rings do not yet exist, new rings are in the midst of being created. The Rings of Power only required the first season to live up to its title. Let's take a deep dive into all of the new information that has been unearthed with this latest episode. But be warned, this video contains spoilers. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. So thank you, and let's begin. A brief breakdown of the episode. We've finally reached the end of the first season of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, directed by J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, and we now have our explanations. We'll briefly sum up the events of the episode before moving on to the creation of the rings. Following their defeat in Middle-earth, Tar Miriel and Elendil travel home to Numenor only to learn that her father, the king, has passed. Pharazôn has assembled a horde of craftsmen, including Elendil's non-canonical children Arien, to create a statuary tomb appropriate for the late monarch. Nori, along with the rest of the Harfoots and her team, hunts down the Meteor Man, only to learn that he has been kidnapped by 3 white-clad strangers, evidently working for Sauron, whom they assume the Meteor Man to really be. Harfoot commander Sadok Burrows is murdered. Nori wakes the Meteor Man to his real nature, which is good, after which he promptly turns the 3 evildoers into moth-made bones. By the conclusion of the episode, when he heads off for the far east province of Rhûn, it's evident that the Meteor Man called the Stranger seems to be Gandalf the Grey. Yes, he arrived in Middle-earth many thousands of years before his canonical entrance. Galadriel and Halbrand eventually arrive in Elfland, where elf physicians treat Halbrand's wounds. He instantly befriends Celebrimbor, showing him how to employ the only piece of mithril that Elrond salvaged from Khazad-dûm to construct alloys with which he may create the magical equipment he needs to save the elves on Middle-earth. A circle shape is preferred so that the metal's magic can rebound upon itself. After further study and refining of the technique, a small circular item, a ring, is chosen, ultimately becoming 3 rings for the sake of balance. Meanwhile, Galadriel checks the local archives and discovers that Halbrand cannot be the true monarch of the Southlands. He very immediately exposes himself to be Sauron and attempts to entice Galadriel into a marital partnership. He leaves after she rejects him. She goes to Elrond and Celebrimbor and advises them not to cooperate with Halbrand again if he reappears. However, she does not divulge that he is Sauron for unclear reasons. Elrond figures it out all by himself, but says nothing about it. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor and his artisans create the 3 rings for the elves as Sauron approaches the fringes of Mordor.
You would make me a tyrant.
I would make you a queen.
Circling back to the creation of the rings, we go right back to Eregion, where Galadriel persuades Celebrimbor and Elrond to make 3 rings rather than 2. She observes that 1 ring will poison and 2 will separate. However, as Celebrimbor realizes, 3 will be balanced. However, the elfsmith still needed a valuable metal to solidify the mithril in order to forge these rings successfully. Finrod's knife, made of Valinor steel and gold, just so happens to hold the key. Galadriel is hesitant to give up her late brother's sword. Then again, she's had it for millennia. However, for the sake of the greater good, she agrees to pass it over. After a somewhat ominous montage mixed with the scenes of Elrond acquiring the Southland's parchment and Galadriel lying to him, the very first Rings of Power are made. Everyone, please say hi to Vilya, Nenya, and Narya. We'll get back to knowing everything about them soon enough.
The powers we forged today must be for the elves alone.
The 3 Rings of Power and their implications. And thus, the first season of Amazon's The Lord of the Rings of Power has finally come to a conclusion. The 8th and final chapter of Season 1 doesn't hold back at all either, concluding with the creation of Middle-earth's first 3 Rings of Power. These rings, made by Celebrimbor as well as the elven blacksmiths of Eregion, are designed to save the elves from fading and being forced to leave Middle-earth. While the Rings of Power concludes its first season on a solid note by concentrating on the formation of the 3 rings, the show contradicts J.R.R. Tolkien's interpretation of events. Here's all you need to know regarding the 3 rings as shown in the Season 1 finale of the Rings of Power, including who became their bearer, everything that they're capable of doing, and also how their formation varies from their roots in Tolkien's books. The 3 rings carried by the kings of the elves underneath the sky are among the last created in Tolkien's Legendarium. Contrary to the Rings of Power, all of the 3 rings are made only after the 9 rings for mortal men and the 7 rings for the dwarf lords on Middle-earth have been created. That implies the 3 rings aren't formed until after Celebrimbor, played by Charles Edwards, has been instructed how to make them by Sauron, who was actually Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. Canonically, in Episode 8, Sauron makes a reference to his written position as Anatar by saying that Celebrimbor should take his crafting guidance as a gift. The 3 rings are made while Sauron is absent, just as they are in the Rings of Power. However, he is not there when Celebrimbor creates them, not because he has fled because of Galadriel, played by Morfydd, but because he has gone back to Mordor to covertly construct the One Ring. The Rings of Power Season 1 finale significantly alter Tolkien's timeline of events. The crafting of the rings will very certainly become a source of debate among Tolkien aficionados, despite the fact that the 3 rings seem to have the same power in the Rings of Power as they do in Tolkien's writings. Tolkien referred to the 3 rings as Narya, Nenya, and Vilya. Although nothing is known about their exact abilities, the 3 included colorful stones that corresponded to the forces they were named after, notably fire, water, and air. These forces also serve as a reminder of what happened to Feanor's 3 Silmarils. One had been hurled into the waters, another was lost in a flaming pit, and the last one was turned into a star in the sky. However, unlike in the Rings of Power, just one, Nenya, was created using Mithril. Furthermore, because of how they were made, specifically in the utter lack of Sauron's corrupted influence, the 3 rings fashioned only by Celebrimbor could not render their bearers invisible or provide them power over others. Instead, they were endowed with the ability to defend and heal, which 2 of their carriers eventually employed. Unfortunately, because they were created using Sauron's teachings to Celebrimbor, the 3 rings remained under the control of the One Ring. That meant they couldn't be used at the same time Sauron was wearing the One Ring, or their wearers would be exposed to his control. It remains to be seen how the Rings of Power will interpret the 3 rings, but the fact that the series utilizes a picture of the artifacts to cut to a scene of Sauron's eye suggests they don't exist apart from him. The 3 elven Rings of Power are finally presented to Círdan, the Shipwright, Galadriel, and Gil-galad. Played by Benjamin Walker in Tolkien's Legendarium, the Rings of Power Season 1 conclusion, however, does not show anybody really wearing the 3 rings, raising the question whether their wearers will be identical to those featured in Tolkien's writings. Círdan will, however, be presented in Season 2 of the Rings of Power. Thus, it appears reasonable to infer that the series will not stray too far from that significant plotline. Of course, concerns about what's going to happen next. After all, since the 3 rings are already present in Celebrimbor, Elrond, who is played by Robert Aramayo, and Galadriel are all informed that Halbrand is untrustworthy. How can any of the elves be duped into making 16 other Rings of Power with him? Hopefully, Season 2 of the Rings of Power will answer that issue soon.
Those words. Power over flesh. Where did you hear them?
The three rings are magical artifacts in Tolkien's mythology that, only after one ring, serve as the strongest of the 20 rings of power. The elves of Eregion concealed the three rings from Sauron after sensing his evil intentions. After the ruination of the One Ring, they were transported across Middle-earth to the blissful land of Valinor at the conclusion of the Third Age. Commentators have noted that the three rings allowed the elves to stop time inside their lands, particularly in Lothlorien, where Galadriel possessed Nenya. Others have pointed out that their influence was beneficial in contradiction to the One Ring, and also that Tolkien utilizes the three rings to emphasize on the heavenly and sacrificial qualities of the elves during the War of the Ring. Tolkien worked on the names, descriptions, and abilities of the three rings throughout many revisions of his stories. He struggled to incorporate these rings into both the current One Ring narrative and the vast yet ring-free legendarium. A few of the details, such as Vilya being the greatest of the three and Narya being referred to as the Great, were inserted during the final proofreading stage right before printing. The rings were once known as Kemen, Ir, and Menel, which meant the rings of earth, sea, and heaven. Tolkien grappled with the idea of the elven rings being given a specific status and pondered releasing the three rings once the One Ring was burned. In an unfinished manuscript by Tolkien, Galadriel advised Celebrimbor to demolish all the rings after Sauron's deceit was discovered, but when he couldn't bear the thought of destroying them, she proposed hiding the three rings. Celebrimbor, according to unfinished tales, presented both Narya along with Vilya to Gil-galad, who was the High King of the Noldor at the onset of the War of Sauron and the Elves. Later, Gil-galad sent Vilya to his subordinate Elrond, and Círdan, the shipwright, was entrusted with Narya by Celebrimbor, Lord of Mithlond's havens and leader of the Falathrim, or People of the Shore. Tolkien speculated that Sauron did not uncover the location of the three, but they were entrusted to Galadriel and Gil-galad. In his writings, Tolkien stated that the three's principal strength was the suppression and slowing of degradation, which resonated with the elves in their quest to preserve what they cherished on Middle-earth. The elves who stayed on Middle-earth as permanent beings in an evolving world depended on the three rings to postpone the inevitable emergence of the dominion of men. Tolkien noted that elves may only remain immortal for as far as the world exists. Therefore, they are worried about the constraints of deathlessness in both change and time. They were deathly afraid of the thought of fading because they wanted the joy and flawless memories of Valinor, while remaining on Middle-earth with their distinction as the fairest rather than being at the bottom rung of the ladder in the Undying Lands. In Quenya, Narya, often referred to as the Ring of Fire, meant fiery red from the original word Narwa. Narya was characterized as having the ability to encourage people to reject tyranny, subjugation, and despair, as well as the power, like the other three rings, to conceal the holder from remote observation, save for the wearer of the one, and to provide resistance to the exhaustion of time. It is also supposed to have magical abilities and fire powers, since Gandalf claims to hold the Flame of Aenor when facing Durin's Bane. Celebrimbor bestowed Narya and Vilya onto the High King of the Noldor, Gil-galad. Narya was given to Gil-galad's lieutenant, the Lord of the Havens of Mithlond named Círdan, who retained it when Gil-galad died. Círdan, understanding Gandalf's real nature and mission, entrusted him with Narya to help him in his labors upon his arrival in Middle-earth in Third Age 1000. Except for Elrond, Galadriel, and Círdan, no one knew Gandalf bore it during the Third Age. It's unclear how or where Gandalf employed it, but in the siege of Minas Tirith, he instilled hope and bravery in those who encountered him. This might be one of Narya's influences. It is uncertain if the ring boosted Gandalf's ability to control fire. Elrond asserted unequivocally that while the three rings are not idle, they were not created as weapons of war. They were made to protect and heal. Because they were designed to fend off the ravages of time, the rings could only provide the user with increased stamina and tenacity, as Círdan explained when he offered Narya to Gandalf. The ring was discovered on Gandalf's Gandalf's finger in Grey Havens, wherein he carried it off to the Undying Lands as a relic. An added scene in The Hobbit Extended Edition, notably The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, depicts Gandalf being questioned about Narya in Dol Guldur. According to the texts, Narya is invisible, but when examined, it exposes itself on Gandalf's hand. While fighting Durin's Bane in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf claims to be the holder of the Flame of Aenor and a servant of the Secret Fire. Gandalf is unlikely to expose his possession of Narya to an adversary. It's possible that Gandalf was only trying to scare the Balrog away, as the monster was not a servant of Sauron at the time, by declaring himself as a follower of the Valar and ultimately Eru Ilúvatar, who alone was the flame imperishable inside himself. During the Grey Haven sequence towards the conclusion of The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King, Narya could also be seen on Gandalf's hand.
This is Nenya, the Ring of Adamant, and I am its keeper.
Nenya is derived from the Quenya Nen, which means water. It is also referred to as the Ring of Adamant, Ring of Water, and the White Ring. Nenya is said to be constructed of mithril and adorned with an adamant white stone. Lady Galadriel of Lothlorien wore the ring, which was generally invisible, while Frodo Baggins had seen it because he was a ring bearer too. Sam Gamgee informed Galadriel he saw only a star through her finger. Nenya's ability was that of protection and shielding from evil. Galadriel utilized these abilities to build and sustain Lothlorien. The strength of the ring waned after the destruction of the One Ring and the defeat of Sauron, as did the strength of the rest of the Rings of Power. Galadriel carried Nenya aboard a vessel from the Grey Havens to the west, joined by the two other elven ring bearers. With the ring gone, Lothlorien's enchantment and beauty diminished, and it steadily depopulated. It was empty by the time Arwen arrived to die in FO 121. Nenya is shown in the Hobbit movies as a gleaming white metal, most likely mithril. On the band is a white flower-shaped decoration, and within the floral ornament is a white gem. In The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, Nenya could be seen on Galadriel's hand as she entered Dol Guldur. Nenya appears briefly during the opening sequence of The Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring. Galadriel is depicted getting her ring as a gift along with the other two. She presents the band to Frodo in the more extended version of this movie to demonstrate how she has been forced to make decisions as a ring bearer. Vilya, the most powerful of the three rings, was made out of a sapphire embedded in a gold ring. Vilya was also referred to as the Sapphire Ring, the Blue Ring, and the Ring of Air. Though the complete properties of Vilya are unknown, it may have offered the capacity to cure and protect. Given the incident when Elrond conjured a raging torrent of water when the Nazgûl sought to cross the Bruinen, there is considerable belief that the ring may command some elements. This appears to be the case as Galadriel utilized her ring to gain control of Lothlorien. In Rivendell, Elrond may very well have accomplished the same with Vilya. Vilya, together with Narya as well as Nenya, was brought to Gil-galad, the Elven king in Lindon, in the year Second Age 1603. Gil-galad eventually handed the band to Elrond, who wore it for the rest of the Second Age and the whole Third Age. After Sauron's defeat and the destruction of the One Ring, Vilya's abilities gradually diminished, and it was lost at sea with its custodian, Elrond, towards the conclusion of the Third Age. What could be the consequences going ahead? When it concerns the Rings of Power's next move, the issue isn't whether or how it will have a Season 2, but when it will get one. Because of the terms of Prime Video's agreement with the J.R.R. Tolkien estates, the streaming service could only acquire these adaptation rights if it committed to 5 seasons of television. J.D. Payne, co-showrunner, stated that the estate understood from the outset what the scale of the canvas was. He also disclosed that there are elements within the first season that don't pay off until Season 5, and that they already know what their final shot for the last episode will be. Prime Video will be involved in the Rings of Power market for many years to come, and with Season 1 officially over, audiences are eagerly anticipating Season 2. Fortunately, production for the 8-episode season began recently in London. Here's what we know about Rings of Power's future. So yet, only one aspect has been confirmed. Círdan, who is among the eldest and greatest of the elves, is going to enter the plot during Season 2. Círdan has a significant role to play in Middle-earth's history, despite the fact that the character has not yet yet been cast. Círdan, with the help of his people, constructed the Grey Havens in the Second Age when they made ships that transported elves towards the Undying Lands. Círdan carried the elven ring Narya, fought with Gil-galad, the High King in the last alliance of men and elves, and reigned over the Grey Havens in the Third and Fourth Ages. In a recent interview, the showrunners teased about where the plot may go next. Darkness awaits Galadriel, who has been misled and wooed by Sauron. Payne thoughtfully stated that there needs to be a reckoning when it comes to her. Despite the fact that Sauron was participating in the science underlying the rings' creation, we see her giving the go-ahead to build the rings regardless. She must also accept responsibility for empowering the Dark Lord. On a raft, she saved his life. She was a witness to him emerging from obscurity to command an army. That's a lot to deal with and be liable for. We feel like she will have to start picking up those links and observe how her decisions affect her numerous relationships. McKay stated that Elrond had uncovered proof of Galadriel withholding information from him, and that her suffering as a result of this has not yet finished. Speaking of Galadriel, notice how she casually notes in episode 7 that she was previously married? We haven't heard the end of that factoid either. Payne explained that the showrunners intended to let fans know that this is an aspect of her that may become essential later on. They didn't just remove her past off the table and declare him dead. She claims she never saw him again and his current condition is an ellipsis. But if and whenever that returns, it will be like a runaway train smashing into her, if indeed her husband is still alive. Now that the producers have laid the groundwork for her connections with Sauron, Elrond, and even Gil-galad, they will be able to see how her additional relationships may be, including Celeborn. We'll continue to reveal other parts of her in the future seasons. And now that Sauron and indeed the Rings of Power are definitely in play, the next season of the TV series is off to a solid start. McKay added that Sauron is obviously now a chess piece on the board. Considering that a slew of dominoes will begin to fall in place, the Ring poem appears in a song performed by Fiona Apple that is arranged by Bear McCreary near the end of the 8th episode. 7 rings, 9 rings, 1 ring. Each batch might represent a new chapter in the tale as well as a new stage in Sauron's evolution throughout the Second Age. There are some indications as to where the show could be heading next in the 8th episode. In Season 2, Payne indicated a new focus on Sauron, stating that Season 1 begins with a question: who is Galadriel? What happened to her? What did she go through? Why is she so driven? In Season 2, they'll be following the same approach with Sauron. Most likely the puzzle pieces will be put together. While no premiere date has been set, it appears like Prime Video is speeding up development. Jennifer Salk, the head of Amazon Studios, indicated that the show's producers are now working on Season 2. They're going to get it out there as quickly as they can, and they want to have the shortest period between seasons feasible, but they also want to maintain the standard as high as possible. So it will take whatever it takes. However, there is some urgency in going rapidly, which is the reason the writers have continued work during their break, and they're moving quickly. Conclusion. While there are a lot of loose ends that Season 1 leaves us with, we can only speculate what Season 2 will be up to, seeing how Amazon Prime has strayed drastically from Tolkien's original works about the creation of the rings and the advent of Gandalf. It's truly impossible to make any accurate predictions. It is pretty surprising that the series has made such drastic changes though, especially when fans argue how Tolkien already had a profound and well worked out lore, and that there was absolutely no need to change anything other than to make a few additions in the more unclear portions. As for the rings, while the dates of their creation have been altered, their powers remain pretty much identical, so it will be interesting to see what role they play out in future seasons. There have been contending reviews about the show, but one thing is for sure, everyone will be waiting for the revelations that the next season will bring to us with bated breath. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.